All right, moving off a spreadsheet into the field this week, talking building beds. For somebody that hasn't seen a picture of your farm, when you first saw the site and walked on it, what would they see when they looked at the place where crops are going to be grown?
So it's relatively flat. It's got a little bit of a roll to it. Um, but I would say nothing more than like your average lawn. Like maybe between like the highest point of like the cultivated land to the lowest points like maybe a foot. And that's over like a 200-foot span, so like pretty gentle grade. Um, like pretty low organic matter, not a ton. Um, you know, the South here, like the Southeast, like we're not known for the richest soil, um, especially with organic matters concerned. But really good. For better or for worse, first time I showed up on the farm, it had been sort of just sitting. There was stuff that was growing, but the person that had been here previously, because essentially it was like as one person's leaving, I'm coming in. And so I was able to sort of see how they were doing their stuff. Um, and there wasn't really much emphasis put on cultivation, like during the actual growing period. So it's just like weeds galore. Um, but, uh, but overall, I mean, considering some of the other places that I've looked at, obviously it was already like well worked. So I'm not having to like bust up sod and relatively loose, not super hard pan, not hard compaction, mostly just like low organic matter and you know, the world's biggest weed seed bank.
So it sounds pretty good on the surface relative to other stories I've heard in the past. The previous person that was in there, were they working off 30-inch bed tops or anything aligned with market farming that you would use?
No, just some, you know, older guy, you probably call him like a good old boy. He's just like he used a tractor, would just like till a strip with a tractor and then do like plant one row of something. So like super, even though it was on a small scale, very much your standard sort of conventional um, growing practices. Definitely like nowhere near market gardening.
So when you saw that, you thought, okay, this is workable. I can do something with this. What was your first step to decide, how do I start to manipulate what's here into something that I can work with?
So unfortunately, just because of the amount of growth, like, the Johnson grass, the coffee weed, the various, the broom sedge, the things that were like grown up, like it was really hard to get a lay of the land, like where are the falls, these different sort of things. And the landlord basically came in and like bush hogged everything to the ground and then like disc harrowed everything. So when I assumed the property, it was like freshly cultivated bare earth, from one edge to the other, which is probably not how I would have done it. Ultimately, I probably would have just bush hogged it and kind of left that as somewhat of a mulch, even though it was full of seed, just because it would have kept the ground covered. But step one was definitely like to get it down to the ground to know where like as where things fell. So I knew hydrology or hydrologically speaking, I knew like what would be the best orientation for laying out beds.
When you're at that state, you could start to probably visualize, okay, here's what I want. So you're thinking 30-inch beds. Is it a square shaped property? I mean, that's everybody's dream, or some sort of rectangle, or is it some weird shape?
It's it's mostly a rectangle. If you were to take the portion where the high tunnel is, um, then yeah, it's like almost a perfect square. Um, it's obviously not 100%, but it more or less it's like a just like a nice square piece of property to work with.
Okay. So you see that. all right, I can make something work off of this. You're starting to make observations about the slope. Where's the water going to come when it comes? Because you guys can get dumped on in rain, and you need to be able that rain to get off the fields when it does come. How had you planned on laying out like bed blocks, and did working at Crystal Organic have any rub off in terms of your bed block system, how you wanted to do that, or what influenced that? Because a lot of people have different systems in mind. I mean, everybody's a 30-inch bed, but 10 blocks per or 10 beds per block. What were your initial thoughts of how you wanted to lay it out?
So I had a couple of constraints that I had to work up against. One is along the sort of like southeastern side of the farm is a row of 14 4 by 8 foot stone raised flower beds. So they're like stones stacked up and cemented in, like they're not going anywhere. And frankly, they're beautiful and they'll be full of perennials and it'll be great. But like there's no moving those. And so that was like constraint number one. It's like I have to go based off of that. Um, and then number two, along the edge of the property or along the edge of the cultivated area of the property is 3 frost-free hydrants sticking up out of the ground. And then there's one in the very center of the cultivated property. So it's not like I just have this like large expanse that I can just do anything. It's like, all right, I've got to think about this hydrant here. Both thinking about it from the aspect of like if I'm going to drive a tractor through here or a wheelbarrow or a lawnmower, but then also thinking like the occasional time that I, even if it's just initially have to do some like deep cultivation to prep the soil, like I don't want to, if I run a subsoiler through there, I don't want to hit that water line. And so I had to kind of work around those constraints to sort of start laying everything out.
And at the end of the day, what did that end up with in terms of bed lengths, number of blocks, beds per block?
I essentially broke it down into I went back and forth on bed length. So I initially wanted to do 100-foot beds. Um, and then I thought, you know what? No, that's a little too daunting. 100 feet is just a lot to sort of manage and to think about and conceptualize when it comes to like crop planning and everything. And so I was like, all right, well, we'll do 50-foot beds. So then, and then once I started learning that, then I'm thinking, all right, well, then you have to have some sort of like a pathway in between to be able to walk, get around, so on and so forth. And then as I started kind of drawing and literally like had a picture of the property, like Google Earth viewed the picture and just like sketching out, knowing what my scales were, doing that and realizing it's like, you know what? No, just for sheer simplicity of like maximizing the space, like we went back to 100-foot beds, and where that hydrant was, we settled on a block of 16 100-foot beds between the flower beds and the hydrant with an 8-foot pathway, or sort of like 8-foot strip. And then another block of 16-foot beds up against the high tunnel, and then perpendicular to that is another row of, I think it'll end up being 12 100-foot beds. So sort of like 3 blocks, 2 of them 16, one of them 12. And as far as being crystal, 100-foot bed felt very daunting. Like that's a lot of space. It's a long stretch to conceptualize, even if you break it in half. But then realizing it's like all of the high tunnels at Crystal are, 36 by 90. So it's like that's 10 more feet. And like that doesn't feel daunting. Like that feels like a very adequate amount of space. Plus it's like a 4-foot bed top. So if anything, it's even less to have to deal with. And so that experience and realizing how manageable that actually can be sort of dictated the plan of doing the 3 blocks combined with the physical constraints that we have.
I've never been there. What's daunting about 100-foot bed, just from your
I,
vantage point?
I think it's just psychological, like when you stand at the end and you look all the way down and and especially initially, I envision like one crop of something, like it was hard to envision like just split it in half. I mean, like basically go back to your 50-foot bed plan and just plant half of it. Um, but it was just like the idea of it all being one thing and, having to pull all of that out of the seed house and then plant it and then have to harvest it all. I think it was more of a psychological game because now I'm like, oh man, like I have, 200 feet of broccolini now. And I'm like, man, I think I want to do more. So, I think it was just sort of those like newbie, nerves of like, oh my God, is this too much? Do I need to break it up so it's more manageable?
At the end of the day, it puts you roughly 44 beds. How does that feel in terms of the daunting level of that when it's maxed out? Like, is that going to feel like, wow, that's a lot? Does that feel like, that's not that bad? How do you feel about 4,400-foot beds?
It definitely it feels like it's gonna be hard to do alone for sure. Like I've heard the numbers thrown out that I guess like on like a really, well refined market garden, you want to be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 3 people per acre. And so I'm right at an acre, and I definitely get it now. Like when it comes to, all of the aspects of it, not just cultivation, but harvest, post-harvest, all of the things, all of the aspects that will go into that many beds. And there's more space than that. Once you include the high tunnel, which is 4 50-foot beds, and then another kind of low spot at the end of the 13 or the 12 row block that I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do with yet. Um, like it's going to be a huge challenge to try to cultivate all of this. And like if I had it full and it's really like humming, it's going to be hard to do alone. Like I'm definitely going to need a person or two.
Laying it out on Google Earth, and then starting to put it into reality. You've already built some beds. How does
Yeah.
reality match up to what you drew up on Google Earth, just in terms of feel? It's one thing to look at it on a screen or draw it out on a piece of paper and say, yeah, I like this. And then you actually go do it in the field and you stand in front of it. Did the two align?
Um, yeah, so I think initially it was really hard to have any sort of scale. Even though I thought my scale was right, it was way off. And so I think, if anything, I like laid it out initially and it was like, oh man, yeah, this will definitely be manageable. It's like, oh, I have like 10 beds, and then you realize your scale's off. And then so actually as you start measuring out your bed length, like your bed widths and your pathways and the next bed, and you're like, oh, that's not 10 beds, that's 16 beds. And like I just added 12 more beds to these 2 blocks that I thought I only had 20. Um, now I have 32. And so it changed in that sense. Um, but I also realized that like taking the necessary breathing room of like, all right, so I have 6 feet off of the flower bed, which is just enough to drive a tractor, wheelbarrow, cart, whatever through, and then like an 8 foot pathway. It's like, I definitely was tempted to be like, let's make this as narrow as possible, so we can just cram as much space in there as we can, and realize like, oh no, like I'm really glad that we gave ourselves that elbow room because like one, it's just less space, but also like I have enough room with that big, long, wide, um, sort of like space in between the blocks that if I needed to, I could put a bed on either side and increase production later on down the road if I realize like we need 2 more beds worth of production on the farm.
Would you end up going with for pathway widths?
18. And that's from trial and error. At my home plot last year that I did, just trying to maximize growing space. I went to um, it sort of ended up falling somewhere between like 12 and 14-inch pathways, and it was way too tight. I thought I could make it work, but once you start talking about wheelbarrows and harvest buckets and trying to do anything down there, and it was just way too tight. Honestly, if space was not a constraint, like I would probably do like 20, 24-inch pathways in between. Just give yourself as much wiggle room as possible. But 18 seems to feel good.
So beds are laid out, pathways laid out. You go to start putting in the beds. What's your process of doing this?
So as I've mentioned before, for better or for worse, I had an actual tractor, with a tiller attachment on the back, and a chisel plow, which, if people don't know, aren't familiar with that, it's essentially like, two rows of big, deep, like these sort of chisel tines, like a row of three and a row of two, and they go really deep, like a foot down, foot and a half down, and just like really break up compaction. And so I had like traditional agricultural equipment to work with, and I didn't have like a small garden tiller, or a BCS to work with. Um, so the initial plan was to just till the strip, which ended up, it was like a 4 foot strip, and then I would drive back over it with the tractor and let the tire tracks become the pathways. And that was the initial plan. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to get this done so quickly. But then realizing like once you start trying to do straight lines, and do that and realize like, it's not really exactly 30 inches once like everything sort of breaks down, like the width between the tire tracks. It was closer to like 27 inches. So I realized like, man, I'm losing a lot of like bed space here. So then I had to adapt, and essentially move to, um, kind of lay out my initial fertilizer, like organic fertilizer, till where the bed is, use stakes and string, mark out my pathways in my beds, do like 2 beds at a time, and then basically just shovel out the pathways, shovel 2 inches of soil out of the pathways onto the bed, just sort of define the path and then also build up the bed a little bit.
So they're slightly raised above soil surface,
Yeah.
and then apply compost on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Just wheelbarrow loads. I want to say each 100-foot bed gets somewhere in the neighborhood of probably a dozen wheelbarrow loads. And that gets me right at about 2 inches of compost per bed. Like, yeah, 2 inches of compost across the whole bed.
Are you planning on being a no-till or minimum till farm? How do you see that?
To the best of my ability. I guess we'll just see, between broad forking, leaving the roots in the ground, and like applying compost as we can afford. I think we can do it. It seems like we can. Um, I think the compost is really the big differentiator when it comes to that. Like if we weren't using that compost, it would be tough just trying to keep, weeds down, and bed flips and things like that. But we're going to do our best because at least from my understanding, there's no one really around here, um, that's doing anything close to like real no-till. And so it's a little nerve-wracking because it's like, man, like, is there a reason why nobody's doing this around here, or is it just because no one's really been willing to like risk it? But I'm gonna try and see. We'll talk at the end of the season and see
All
if
right.
no-till is gonna work or not.
I don't recall how much tillage does Crystal Organic do?
Um, you generally like a chisel plow and a till between every planting. It's like with every bed flip, it gets
Okay, so they're
up.
so they're tilling. So you've seen that model.
Yeah.
What what makes you want to do the no-till model?
Um, I'd say part of it is, well, like sort of trying to be ecologically minded, you know, being focused on like, the mycorrhiza in the soil, just biodiversity in the soil, kind of more that like Elaine Ingham living soil food web sort of vibe. That's a huge part. That was probably like the initial part of it. And then trying to deal with the weed seed bank is another big part of it. Like I know like we're gonna deal with weeds. Um, and which is why we have the compost. But I'm really hoping that without disturbing the soil too much, that as the years go on, the cultivation will get less and less because we're not like inverting those layers and disturbing the soil and then also like the soil aggregate, being able to kind of keep some of that in place, as the roots go in and do that and I could get super nerdy with all the different aspects of no-till, but basically those are the three main things is considering the like microbial life, dealing with the weeds, um,
Like the
and then trying to
ecological
think
side
about
of it.
yeah.
Yeah. What are your nervousness is not a word about going into no till?
Um, Compaction to whatever degree, some people would say like compaction's only at a certain point. And it's like just having hard soil doesn't mean it's compacted, but essentially hard soil or compaction, hard to plant into, hard for roots to penetrate into. And then amending beds, like when you're tilling, you can just throw your fertilizer or frankly throw your like compost in there, or your cover crop, and you can just till it in, and then it kind of creates like instant fertility in a way, um, that is like right there throughout like the whole root zone, um, and and so like those are probably the two main fears. It's like, man, like I can apply compost, but is it really penetrating in? Are soil microbes like doing their job? And it's like, am I going to get three bed flips into this bed and it's going to be hard as a rock, and no amount of broad forking is going to do me any good, without some sort of massive intervention.
When you first did that till on the soil, how did it look from a vegetable grower's point of view?
um Look awesome. I mean, it's soft, it's fluffy, you can stick your hand, like super down in there. um Without a subsoiler, I can't go super, super deep, but like I can go down 6 inches, a foot, in the ground, and it's pretty good. Like I can work my hand down in there. And of course there's no weeds. Like it's just like nice, beautiful, bare soil. But um, but like within days, you start to see the weed seed germination, um, whether it's tilled or not. Um, but it definitely it's like a really pretty treat to see like freshly tilled ground for sure.
Have you done any sort of tarping since you've prepared those beds, to try and knock out some of that early germination?
Yeah, I have my bee block that I haven't had a chance to get compost on yet. I've got about a third of that formed and ready to go. And I have a silage tarp on it right now. So it's covering those, just keeping the weeds down. And then also keeping the soil covered, keeping it moist, just not letting it just be bare and dry out.
For the initial bed amending, how much cost do you have per 100-foot bed into compost if you had to guess?
When it comes to compost, I sort of lucked out. I found a source that was pretty cheap. Um, like insanely cheap. Like what did it come out to? I mean, I got a 24 yard load of compost delivered, like dumped on the farm for like $400, like insanely cheap. Is it certified organic? No. Um, it's a combination of like municipal yard waste, that this farm, like they have a contract with the city close to where we live, and they get all of like the grass clippings and the wood chips, or not grass clippings, but like leaves and limbs and things like that. And then they have a chicken operation. And so they mix like composted chicken manure that's all non-GMO, um, fed chickens, no hormones or anything like that, mixed with the the yard waste, and then it sits in windrows, is turned twice, and then it sits for a year. So it's pretty good stuff, and it's super cheap. And so, and it's looking that it's like 24 yards seems to be able to do like one block. So 24 yards does about 1,600 foot beds.
That's my math is fuzzy this time of day.
Yeah, me too.
It's about 1660 a cubic yard, definitely on the cheap side. So not bad. And you're 30, well, $25 or something like that into a bed. Not bad for the initial fertility to get it up and running. And then you'll plan on adding compost at what point? After bed flips, like yearly?
Probably yearly. I don't know if I'll
Yeah.
do every bed flip, but I also did do like an initial. I did like a chicken manure based organic fertilizer, just sort of kind of like a broad spectrum. I want to say it was like 543. Oh, it's Harmony. People have probably heard of it, Harmony, the organic fertilizer. I did a pretty generous application of that when I did the initial tillage. Um, because from the soil test that I got initially, I was fine on nitrogen and a little low on potassium and phosphorus, but not much. And so, I just wanted to give like an initial, it's like if I'm already going to be inverting the soil, like let's go ahead and add a little bit of fertility in there and then start like the more intentional no-till kind of fertility application as we go.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you had a good old boy farm in there, maybe you got a bunch of 20, residual in the soil or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully some of that jet fuel that'll carry me through this year.
Overall, soil test looked pretty good. It sounds like the levels were okay. You mentioned in the south organic matter can be low. What did that come in at?
I didn't get a chance to do it.
Okay.
So I just got your basic NPK from the, ag extension office.
At this point, uh, you have the beds in, you've planted in them, you have some crops growing. How's everything looked on that side now that it's one thing, hey, form beds, they look amazing. You plant the plants look happy.
Yeah, I mean, considering that we're in winter and I guess I'm almost 2 months, like a month and a half out from the solstice, where spring is soon coming. Everything looks great. Like there's been like no yellowing. Um, Plants seem to be a little small, but doesn't seem like stunted. It just sort of seems like winter, just sort of like winter slow growth. Um, but germination has been pretty great on the things that I've direct seeded, and for the most part, it's been like on the bed of broccolini, everything got transplanted, and I would say 90% of every transplant is doing great. Some of them just died. I'm not 100% sure why. Um, some of them are a little small, but it doesn't appear to be like there doesn't really seem to be any sort of stress. That could just be my lack of experience talking, but the stuff that is growing is like growing super well, and it's sort of like even out competing what my projected numbers said that like days to maturity would be. So it seems pretty good for right now.
Herein, you had a jungle on there before. How has weed pressure been over the winter?
Um, Man, it's been pretty serious, especially considering winter. I don't know how it is everywhere, but henbit, chickweed, a couple more that I can't remember the names of them off the top of my head. I mean, it's like they grow like grass. Um, and there was a part of me that really contemplated like, do I want to invest the money and the time into like mulching every bed with compost? And after seeing the way that the non-mulched areas look, it's like 100%. I would, if I could, I would double. I would do 4 inches if I had the time and the money. Because like the winter weed seed bank is insane. And the stuff that was coming up in like September, October, the coffee weed, the Johnson grass was pretty killer as well. And so um I definitely have an uphill battle with weeds.
So you're going to be battling nature on this one for a while.
Yeah, for sure.
How much does the compost layer help? You said they look better than the non-covered beds for weed regrowth. But if
Yeah.
like, is it 50% better? Is it 90% better?
Oh, it's 90, yeah, like the beds that have had compost on them and had plants growing in them since, we'll say, early December, there's like a little bit of weed growth on the edges where I think sort of as you spread the compost, it kind of naturally thins out. But like sort of up the middle two-thirds of the bed, I mean, there's no weeds compared to the unmulched beds, where it's like, I wouldn't say it looks like it's completely covered green, but it's like an unmulched bed is probably 50% weed cover, where a mulched bed right now at least is, you know, maybe 5% weed cover and that's just on the edges.
Quite a bit less, quite a bit
Oh yeah.
visually less. Yeah.
Yeah.
For somebody who is looking to put new beds into production from a site like this, what's the time investment you think you have laying that compost on a 100-foot bed? If you started like the compost is there, you're fresh, go. How long is it going to take you to put that 2 inches on one 100-foot bed?
Oh man. Um, I mean, you'd be surprised how much time you spend like just pushing the wheelbarrow, because you obviously, you want to try to keep it in like a spot away from your bed so you're not trying to work around a giant, huge mountain of compost. But I would say I generally spend, if you just like start to finish, it's probably an hour and a half to 2 hours per bed,
Yeah, so let's just
realistically.
say it's 2 hours per bed. So a 16
Yeah.
bed block, that's 32 hours. That's a day and 8 hours
Yeah.
of just moving compost, not including the bed. So I think that's one thing I definitely would have underestimated how long that would take. Like if it was like, hey, let's make 16 beds, put the compost on, like that to me, like I don't a weekend, right? Like you're done.
Mhm.
And I could see, no, 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 no. That's not a weekend. That's a week and a weekend and probably another week.
Well, yeah, I mean it's like 10 to 12 wheelbarrow loads per bed, and that's not like dump it once. It's like you dump the wheelbarrow load like 3 times so that it doesn't like spill out into the pathways or the next bed, and then so that's shoveling, hauling, dumping, doing that 12 times, and then you have to spread it all out and get it nice and even. So yeah, I mean it's a lot of work, way more than I anticipated it being.
Given that, how do you approach the uncomposted beds? Is that something you try and compost this year?
I'm going back and forth on that. I'm thinking like, can I get away with like cover cropping and then like crimping or tarping and just, you know, kind of like a mulch layer and then try to plant into that. Um, you know, because the compost is so cheap and I can kind of get it delivered on a whim. Like the guy's 10 minutes from the farm. Um, I'll probably end up just getting another load for block two, block B, and I'll just slowly chip away at it because I think ultimately, um, being able to have that compost both as like a biological input, fertility input, and then also just like retaining water and and keeping the beds in place. Like with the hydrology, like when we've had super heavy rains, like the compost just like locks those beds in place. Like it even with the amount of time and labor that it's taken, it still feels like well worth the investment. So as we get into the meat of the season, it'll probably just be like, all right, let's slowly chip away at those beds, one a week, two a week, um, until we have block B done. And then block C will probably never get compost. And that'll be kind of our low rotation corn, winter squash, sweet potato
When
block.
do you have to have that second block finished by to meet production needs?
Mm, that is an excellent question. I would say probably, we'll see how this market goes. Um, if I'm hitting those like $1,000 a market goal, um, you know, I would say the springtime would be able to handle sort of like the greens, like the higher rotation stuff. But as we start getting into summer with like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, um, I'd say at least half of that block needs to be done, no later than in, May, June to get
Okay,
ready
so
for
you have enough time.
switch.
You have a lot of time then to chip away at
Yeah,
some
yeah,
point.
yeah.
What about inside the high tunnel? Those are high tunnels premium real estate. What does it look like there in terms of this? What you had to do for soil prep within?
Essentially the same thing. I really haven't treated it much different. Um, 4 50-foot, 30-inch beds, 18-inch pathways. I was able to get a little bit more compost just because the pile is right there next to the tunnel. Um, and the beds are shorter. So, those probably do have 4 inches of compost on every single bed.
Hmm.
But weirdly enough, the weed pressure has been much more in the tunnel than it has been outside. Probably just because of the warmth.
Is it screened in? Like, do you have roll up sides, or what's the deal in that tunnel?
Yeah, so it's got like scissor doors on the ends, and then it has roll up sides. So I
And
can kind of like I can like totally open it up, or I can like really button it down.
is that open to the air?
What
Meaning,
do you
like, could
mean?
weed seeds blow in, or when you roll it up, is their screen?
Oh no, it's just totally open.
Got it. Got it. Okay. When you look at that greenhouse beds, how are you starting to prioritize those when as we get more into the spring? I don't even know if you have anything in them now.
Yeah, they're full. Those are
Okay.
like the first beds to really get filled. Um, yeah, so right now I have two beds or a bed and a half of like a mesclun mix um, for salad mix, and then about half a bed of tatsoi, and then a bed of arugula and a bed of hakurei turnip. So kind of those like quick turnaround, high profitable crops that would probably do okay outside this time of year, but are just jamming in the tunnel. And it'll probably stay in like quick, quick greens like that until until tomato season. So I'll probably like if I have the middle two beds in lettuce and the outer two beds in turnip and arugula, we'll probably alternate those as because everything will probably finish up about the same time. I'll probably alternate those to another planting of that. And then by the time those are done, hopefully my timing's right and it'll be ready for like tomatoes.
Right. So between now and June, you're rocking off those 4 beds in the greenhouse and then the 16 beds in that first block.
Not even. I think I probably like planted right now, it's probably 12. Yeah, it's like 12 out of the 16 on the outside block.
Have you had to taper back the urgency to get all the blocks done? Like, was your initial plan to finish every bed, get every bed prepped, and then once you saw how much of a time commitment was, it's like, well, let's adjust the plan there.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, like I mean, like with my initial plan, like I thought I would be able to form 3, 4 beds a day, run the tractor through with the tiller and then like drive back with and let the tire tracks become the pathways because the tire's about 16 inches wide, maybe a little bit less, maybe. And yeah, I thought I'd be like, this will be done in no time. it might be like 5 loads of compost per bed. And so yeah, I've definitely had to dial back the expectation of how much. Like I would have, if you would have asked me in December, I would have been like, oh yeah, come February, I'll have everything done. Not even close.
Yeah, like everything, it's a time shortage, right? It's not a shortage of want to happen. It's just the prioritization. It
Yeah,
gets
it's hard to
triaged.
move compost when it's 8 o'clock at night and it's pitch black and it's been dark for an hour and a half. It's wintertime. It is what it is.
Yeah, hearing your story and just listen to a lot of this, a lot of it is like it just makes you realize when you started on the side, which you effectively are right now, right? Like you'd agree, you're starting this farm on the side.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. Like the most side hustle of side hustle that you can get.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it's at least a year to start up, to get everything set up, running, which sounds crazy, right? At first thought, if you said, hey, like this is going to take you, it's January 1, this will be set up next January 1. I think everybody would be like, yeah, right. Like it's a
Yeah.
month or two, but it's just not. Like in the context of life, you get tired, you get psychologically tired, you have other commitments.
Yeah.
Things just take time and then there's sacrifices. Do I do compost or do I go home? Do I do compost or work on production? Um,
Hmm.
it's a world of trade-offs in it all. But at the end of the day now, I mean, just where you're sitting here early February, looking back at where you're at, are you happy with the bed choices you've made so far, the layout, the length, all that?
Yeah, I'm really happy with the both the layout and the length. You know, hydrologically speaking, I don't know if I could have nailed it any better than I did. Um, have a little bit of a low spot at the end of one chunk of beds, but just a little dig the pathway out a little bit deeper to kind of get over that hump, and then I'm good to go. 100-foot beds are super manageable. Honestly, at this point, like a 50-foot bed seems a little too small. Um, I can't really imagine if I would have actually split it up the way I did, where I had like 4 blocks of 50-foot beds instead of 2 blocks of 100. Um, and and so yeah, I've been super happy with the layout that we've had so far.
Yeah. It sounds like you're working your way there slowly but surely. We'll follow along with progress. It'd be interesting to track weed pressure and how you deal with that. I think that will be a theme of the season, if I had to guess. But so far, so good.
Yep, we're getting there slowly but surely.